Our life was built on routine. Routine is safety, isn't it? It's the comfortable assurance that tomorrow will look exactly like today. For 12 years, my husband David and I lived in a beautiful house where the sunlight always fell in the same place on the polished wood floor, and the only surprises were the good ones. We had 2 children, 2 cars, and what I believed was unquestioning trust. David was an architect, a meticulous man whose work was defined by structure, and whose life, I thought, was defined by honesty. The crack in that perfect structure didn't come with a fight or a sudden revelation. It came with the sound of a broken lock. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a day as mundane as any other. I was organizing the attic, a forgotten space filled with the comfortable dust of our history. Old baby clothes, faded photo albums, and boxes labeled with dates that seemed a lifetime ago. I stumbled upon an antique wooden chest that had belonged to David's grandfather. It was beautiful, heavy, and usually locked with a small brass padlock. David had always been possessive of it, calling it his family legacy box. I hadn't intended to open it. But as I shifted the chest, something small and metallic clattered to the floor. It was the key to the padlock, bent and discarded, as if the lock had been forced open some time ago. Curiosity, that little dangerous whisper, urged me forward. I reached out and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, tucked beneath legal documents and old financial statements, was a book. Not a photo album or a history book. It was a simple, leather-bound journal, the kind you buy hoping to fill with profound thoughts. It looked old, almost forgotten. As I lifted it out, a small, loose slip of paper fluttered to the floor. It was a receipt for a private post office box, rented a year ago, located miles away from his office or our home. That postbox receipt was the first cold rush of unsuspicion. Why would David, a man whose entire life flowed through corporate channels and our family address, need a secret private mailbox? I opened the journal. The first few pages were blank, but the handwriting on page 5 was undeniably his, precise, elegant, and utterly unfamiliar. The date was exactly 1 year old. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I began to read the first entry. It didn't start with a complaint about work or a reflection on life. It started with a name. Ilara. The words were not those of a dutiful husband and father. They were passionate, consuming, and full of intense secret longing. He described meetings, whispered conversations, and shared weekends, the kind of intimacy I hadn't shared with David in years. He wrote about a fresh start, a new reality, and a life he was building, meticulously away from me. I stood in the silence of the dusty attic, holding the physical evidence of my shattered reality. It wasn't just a physical affair. This journal was the diary of a man who had already left in his marriage, piece by calculated piece. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was a year-long project, planned and executed by the architect I thought I knew. The wave of shock was followed by a terrifying stillness. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply closed the book. The grief was too enormous, too profound to be processed in that moment. It transformed instantly into an Huxley's cold clarity. David hadn't just broken a vow. He had destroyed 12 years of unquestioning trust. But the postbox in the journal hinted at something far larger than just one affair. I had to read every word, every entry, to uncover the full scope of the double life he had been designing behind my back. My life as his wife was over. Now, my life as his silent investigator had begun. I descended the attic stairs, carrying the secret diary like a deadly ticking device. I couldn't keep the diary in the house. The risk of him finding me with it was too high. I hid it deep within a spare tire in the trunk of my car, along with the receipt for the secret postbox. The journal became my nightly companion, read only after David was deeply asleep, using the faint beam of a reading lamp in the locked pantry. I had to consume his secret world in pieces, forcing myself to maintain my composure during the day while my nights were spent reading the confession of a stranger. The early entries detailed the progression of his relationship with Ilara, a landscape architect he met on a large city project. It was painful, humiliating to read the details of their affection, the shared jokes, the plans for future trips. But I forced myself past the hurt. My goal was not emotional validation. It was more absolute truth. Then, the tone of the journal shifted dramatically. Around the 6-month mark, the entries stopped being about stolen moments and started being about money. David, the successful architect, was complaining about financial stress. He detailed complex problems with his firm's books, referencing a silent investor he had brought in, a partnership he had never mentioned to me. He wrote about drawing enormous amounts of cash, always justifying it by saying it was for untraceable payments to Ilara's shell company for consultation fees. The truth was darker. The consulting fees were a lie. Ilara wasn't a silent partner. She was a tool. The diary revealed that David wasn't just building a new life. He was systematically looting. His own firm, diverting funds through Ilara's fake company to cover a massive, disastrous personal investment he had made without telling anyone. He was using the affair as a smokescreen for a much larger, more terrifying financial fraud. I began to cross-reference the journal entries with our joint bank statements. The evidence was damning. Large erratic withdrawals, unexplained deposits from untraceable sources. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he had put our entire financial future at catastrophic risk. The house, the children's college funds, my own retirement, all were built on a foundation of sand, because David had gambled and lost, and was now stealing to cover his tracks. But the absolute, most chilling moment came in a late entry from 3 months prior. It wasn't about Ilara or the money. It was about me. David had started writing about me, his wife. He referred to me only as the foundation. He detailed his plans for our future, not together, but separately. He wasn't planning to divorce me and share assets. He was detailing a plot to legally and financially erase me from his life. He wrote about a specific clause in our prenuptial agreement, a clause I had signed years ago. Trusting him, assuming it was boilerplate, he planned to trigger this clause by establishing legal residency out of state using the secret post office box address. The goal was to secure nearly all the marital assets by claiming I was an uncooperative spouse who refused to relocate. His betrayal wasn't just infidelity. It was a meticulously designed scheme of financial annihilation. The architect wasn't building a new life. He was systematically demolishing his old one, intending to leave me with nothing but emotional wreckage. He was planning to shut down my entire existence. I read that entry 4 times, my hands numb against the thin leather. The shock of the affairs and the fraud paled in comparison to the calculated cruelty of his ultimate plan. I was not just a victim of passion. I was the target of a long-term financial weapon. I felt a surge of cold, focused rage that didn't scream, but whispered. He underestimated me. He thought I was blind, trusting, and passive. He thought he could design a perfect secret escape plan. He had no idea that by keeping this journal, he had provided me with the complete, damning blueprint to his own destruction. My tears finally came, not from sorrow, but from the sudden, powerful knowledge of what I had to do. I would not simply survive this betrayal. I would use his own meticulous nature against him. The time for grieving was over. The time for meticulous justice had arrived. David's ultimate weapon was his meticulously crafted plan for my financial ruin. My defense had to be equally meticulous, equally final. I realized that the best revenge wasn't personal confrontation, which would only lead to messy accusations and drawn-out legal battles. The best revenge was legal, clean, and professional. It had to come from the system he thought he could fool. My plan had 3 crucial columns, just like a building he would design. Column 1. Securing the foundation. I immediately contacted the best family law attorney in the city, someone David had never met, someone who specialized in complex financial dissolution. I didn't tell her about the diary at first. I simply laid out the red flags, the sudden out-of-state post box, the strange investment losses, and his sudden insistence on reviewing our prenup. She recognized the pattern instantly. We moved to legally quarantine all shared assets. Without David knowing, she put liens on the house, froze a portion of the investment accounts, and filed protective paperwork that would instantly halt his attempt to trigger the punitive clause in the prenup. He was still writing about his plan in his diary, completely unaware that his foundation was already cemented against him. Column 2. The corporate trigger. Exposing the affair would have damaged David's reputation. Exposing the financial fraud, however, would have destroyed his life entirely. His diary contained everything: names, dates, amounts, and the code names for the shell corporations. But I couldn't simply walk into his office and hand over the diary. It had to look like a discovery from within his firm, triggered by normal business procedures. I became a forensic auditor. I analyzed the diary entries related to the fraud, noting the date of the first unauthorized transfer. I discovered that a mandatory annual audit for his firm was scheduled for the following month. I created an entirely anonymous digital package containing one single piece of evidence, a small spreadsheet that, when cross-referenced with a specific server log, would flag the anomaly of the initial transfer. I used an anonymous private server to email this single, non-damaging clue to a low-level, meticulous compliance officer at his firm. Someone David would never suspect of having the authority or capability to cause him trouble. The email contained one line: "Check server logs for unusual activity on Q4 2024. Code Archway." Archway was David's diary name for the fraudulent account. It was the necessary breadcrumb. Once that officer pulled that thread, the internal pressure, the fear of SEC liability, and the sheer scale of the fraud would trigger an avalanche. His firm would shut him down before the government even had to step in. Column 3. The final confrontation. I needed to ensure he felt the full weight of my knowledge. He had to realize that his meticulously built secret was a joke, and that his downfall was entirely designed by the woman he had underestimated. I planned to confront him only after his professional world was obliterated, leaving him with no power, no resources, and no ability to spin the story. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I had to live with him, share meals, and ask about his day, all while knowing I had detonated a bomb beneath his feet. My composure was my greatest weapon. I maintained the mask of the loving, supportive, slightly distracted wife. Every interaction was a performance. I would look at him, this man of elegant lies, and feel a cool, detached sense of absolute victory. He was focused on Alara, planning their next rendezvous, writing blissfully in his diary about their future. He was entirely blind to the corporate storm brewing around him. He continued to write about his plan to abandon the Foundation, never realizing that the Foundation was already rebuilding itself using his own blueprint. I was waiting for the perfect, devastating moment. The moment when the system he tried to subvert delivered the final, crushing blow. The first sign that my plan was working didn't come from a newspaper headline, but from a change in the atmosphere of our home. It turned toxic, thick with David's rising Carson paranoia. It started with small things. He came home hours late, but didn't offer the usual smooth excuses. He was pale, his hands were trembling, and he barely made eye contact. He started taking every single phone call outside on the patio, even in the freezing rain. He'd pace, his voice a low, frantic murmur, occasionally spiking with an angry hiss. "I told you it was a clerical error." Or, "I need those Q4 reports now." He wasn't fighting an external rival. He was fighting the meticulous investigation I had triggered. The compliance officer had done exactly as I predicted, pulled the small thread I left, found the tiny anomaly, and, terrified of corporate liability, alerted internal legal counsel. Once the lawyers saw the scope of the unauthorized transfers, they were legally obligated to dive deep. The whole house of cards was shaking. David started trying to recruit me back into his sphere of control. He'd bring me expensive gifts, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to secure loyalty. He'd corner me, trying to use the marriage as a shield. "Honey, they're performing a deep audit at the firm. I think someone is trying to sabotage me," he'd say, searching my face for any sign of doubt. "I need you to tell them I've been working with you on those financial projections." I would look at him, my expression one of worried confusion, and gently refuse. "David, I don't know anything about your firm's projections. I'm a teacher. I can't lie to corporate lawyers. If you're innocent, the truth will protect you." Every refusal was a tiny pinprick in his mounting desperation, driving him further into his own isolated panic. He was too arrogant to suspect me. He believed I was too emotionally delicate, too passive to ever uncover his secret, much less orchestrate his downfall. His focus remained outward, a rival, a disgruntled client, anyone but the woman he had betrayed twice. The most difficult moments were the evenings. He would sit at the dinner table, completely distracted, running scenarios in his head. The kids would ask him a simple question, and he'd snap, his usual polished patience completely gone. His deterioration was heartbreaking to witness, even knowing it was entirely deserved. Yet I had to maintain the perfect facade for the children, shielding them from the collapsing storm. I continued to monitor his diary, which was now filled with frantic, disorganized entries about deleting digital footprints and transferring the remaining stolen funds. He was running ragged, chasing shadows, trying to clean up the mess he never realized I had fully documented. The diary, once a testament to his passionate double life, was now a record of his growing paranoia and fear. He started writing less about Ilara and more about the Foundation's unexpected passivity. He noted my strangely calm demeanor, finding it unsettling. He attributed my calm to ignorance. One entry was particularly chilling. She just sits there, calm. She has no idea the cliff edge we're on. Her blindness is my final advantage. He was wrong. My calm wasn't blindness. It was unshakable certainty. His final advantage was about to become his final fatal mistake. The internal audit was reaching its crescendo. I knew the moment was imminent when the sleek, unmarked car, the kind that signifies professional, corporate, and legal investigation, began parking discreetly down the street. The curtain was about to fall on David's perfect performance. I secured the diary and the post office receipt, placing them into a briefcase. I was ready for the final act. The breaking point wasn't the sound of sirens, but the sound of pure, unadulterated failure. David came home on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the internal audit began. He didn't come through the front door. He stumbled through the garage, leaning heavily against the wall. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face was gray, and his eyes were sunken. He had been interrogated by his firm's legal team for over 12 hours. They had found the trail I laid. They had pulled the thread called Archway, and the whole fraudulent scheme had been exposed. He staggered into the living room, collapsing onto the leather sofa. He wasn't aggressive or angry. He was simply unbroken. The arrogant architect who designed perfect lies was now just a man facing total, professional annihilation. I walked in slowly, my composure unwavering, and sat across from him. I didn't speak. I simply let the silence fill the space, allowing the crushing weight of his reality to settle upon him. He looked at me, his gaze unfocused, and began to speak. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession, delivered in a desperate, broken stream of consciousness. "They have everything," he whispered, his voice catching. "They found the offshore accounts. They found Ilara's company, the shell payments. They said they're bringing in the state regulators. My license, my entire career. It's all come shut down." He still didn't mention me. He was still focused entirely on his professional loss. It was his greatest arrogance. He believed the personal betrayal was forgivable, but the corporate betrayal was the ultimate crime. And in his desperation, he started talking about the only thing he knew. The secret diary. The worst part, the absolute worst part is I can't find the diary, he choked out, running a shaky hand through his hair. I can't remember where I put it. If the lawyers find that, if they find that I wrote everything down, the plan for the house, the prenup scheme, my intent, I'll be destroyed. It will prove I planned it all. I can't let them find it. I need to find the damn journal. That was the moment, the confirmation I needed. He had confessed his worst fears, and he had confirmed that the secret diary was indeed the missing link that proved his calculated, premeditated malice. He was terrified of the evidence I already held. He finally looked at me, tears streaming down his face, not for me, but for his ruined life. He started weeping openly, the sound of a man who had reached the bottom of his own deep arrogance. "I am so sorry," he sobbed, finally using the words, but they felt meaningless, hollow. "I'm sorry for the firm. I'm sorry I put us at risk." He still couldn't say he was sorry for the affair, or for the plan to ruin me. His apologies were all about the money and the loss of status. I stood up, walking toward the hall table where I had placed my briefcase. I opened it slowly, deliberately. I pulled out the worn, leather-bound journal and the crumpled post office receipt. I walked back to the sofa and placed both items gently on the cushion beside him. "You're looking for this, David?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of 12 years of broken promises. He stared at the diary, his eyes widening in total, sickening recognition. His face went completely slack. He didn't gasp. He simply froze. The man who had been weeping was now paralyzed by the absolute, definitive exposure of his double life. He reached out a trembling hand, touching the worn leather. You knew?" he managed, his voice a dried rasp. "You read it all?" "I read every single word," I confirmed, stepping back. "I read about Alara. I read about the fraud. And I read about your plan to trigger the prenup and leave the foundation financially erased." He looked from the diary to my face, and in that instant, his arrogance finally vanished. He saw not the passive wife, but the main architect of his justice. He realized that his carefully designed world had been undone, not by an external enemy, but by his own pen, and by the woman he thought too small to notice. His defeat was total. The final moments were quiet, almost surgical. David didn't attempt to lie, fight, or even beg. He simply sat there, staring at the diary, the complete record of his criminal intent. The shame was a mark darker than any accusation. "It was the plan for the prenup," I stated, my voice steady, cutting through the silence. "The financial fraud was a crime against the firm. The prenup scheme was a crime against me. That's the difference, David. I was willing to forgive your mistake years ago. But the second betrayal, the planned, calculated destruction of my future, that proved you are fundamentally dishonest." I pulled the second document from the briefcase, a signed copy of the final divorce settlement papers, along with a protective restraining order that prevented him from accessing the joint safe deposit box or the equity in the house. My attorney had been efficient, using the preliminary evidence of his suspicious activity to secure these safeguards days earlier. "You don't need to argue about asset division," I said, placing the document beside the diary. "It's already finalized. I have secured the house and the children's funds, which were protected from the fraud. You get the liability of your firm's collapse, and the legal defense fund you set up with your own segregated money." I watched him read the documents. Every carefully planned detail of his escape had been countered. His financial ruin was complete. He was left with the legal fallout of his fraud and nothing else. "How long?" he finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on the separation agreement. "How long did you know?" "I knew the moment I opened that diary, David," I replied. "And I have been working every day since then to ensure that the only structure you could build with your lies was your own prison." I then stood, gathering my personal items, my briefcase, my keys, and the small suitcase I had packed days ago. This was the most important thing, to walk away entirely on my terms, leaving him with the wreckage he created. Before I reached the door, he spoke again, a single, plaintive word that held the full weight of his loss. "The children?" I paused, turning back. "The children will be cared for. Their lives, unlike yours, will remain financially and emotionally stable. They are the only innocent victims here, and I will protect them. You may visit them under supervision after the legal dust settles, provided you comply with every court order." I knew my voice was cold, but this was not the time for kindness. This was the time for the unwavering execution of justice. I walked to the front door, pausing on the threshold. I took a deep breath, letting the clean night air clear my lungs of the toxic atmosphere of his lies. "You designed a double life, David," I said, my final words to him, "but you kept the blueprint in a secret diary." "Thank you. It made my job easier." I closed the door gently. The sound was not a bang. It was a simple final click, the sound of a lock being set on a cage. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I got into my car and drove away from the beautiful house, the perfect lie, and the man whose life was officially shut down. My methodical legal revenge was complete. The victim had become the architect of justice. Once the internal legal team confirmed the fraud, the dominoes fell fast. David's firm, facing massive liability, immediately fired him and cooperated fully with the regulatory bodies. The story, a delicious blend of high-stakes corporate crime and personal scandal, became instant local news. I watched it unfold from a temporary anonymous apartment miles away. The headlines were everywhere. Prominent architect charged with embezzlement. Firm rocked by financial scandal. His face, once the picture of polished success, was now plastered on every screen, synonymous with greed and deception. His public humiliation was the final devastating payment for his arrogance. He didn't just lose his money, he lost the one thing he valued above all else: his more perfect reputation. The beauty of my plan was that my existence, my role as the betrayed wife and silent prosecutor, remained entirely outside the narrative. The firm's lawyers assumed the exposure was due to a rival, or perhaps the meticulous compliance officer I had initially contacted. I was a ghost in the machine, and I stayed that way. The divorce went through swiftly and cleanly. My attorney used the journal and the post office receipt as irrefutable proof of his malicious intent and his attempts to hide assets, which ensured a favorable division and secured full custody of the children in the interim. The documents proved he was not just an unfaithful husband, but a calculated, financial predator. The challenge now shifted from legal battles to emotional resilience. Friends called, family offered support, but the public curiosity was immense. I adopted a simple, unwavering mantra. I am protecting my children and focusing on honesty. I didn't mention the diary, the other woman, or the details of his fraud. I simply stated that the foundation of our trust had been shattered, and I was seeking absolute truth. I remember one particular afternoon, when I saw a picture of Alara on a gossip site. She, too, had lost her job and was facing social scrutiny due to her association with David's fraud. She was not the triumphant mistress. She was another collateral casualty of David's massive, self-serving deception. He hadn't just been cheating. He had been using on her to facilitate his corporate crimes. Seeing her face, filled with shock and despair, affirmed my decision. This wasn't about petty revenge between two women. It was about dismantling the machinery of one man's deep, pervasive dishonesty. I began the slow, painful process of talking to my children. They were young enough that the scandal could be framed in simple terms. Daddy made some very big mistakes at work, and he is facing the consequences. It has nothing to do with you, and Mommy is here to keep our family safe. The most important thing was to convey security, stability, and the fundamental value of truth. As the public scrutiny reached its peak, David made one final, desperate plea through his own lawyer. Not to me, but to the firm, begging them to offer a settlement that would save his professional license. His arrogance still clung to him. He believed his talent would somehow outweigh his crime. He was wrong. The firm refused. His fate was sealed. He was entirely shut down by the system he had tried to exploit. David was sentenced to prison time. He was stripped of his architectural license, his significant wealth, and every trapping of the successful life he had meticulously designed. He lost the one thing he could never regain: his standing in the community and the trust of his children. His punishment was not delivered by my anger, but by the undeniable evidence he provided in his secret diary. But the true resolution wasn't his punishment. It was my liberation. The weight that had been crushing my chest for years, the fear, the suspicion, the self-doubt, finally lifted. I hadn't let him get away with it. I hadn't allowed his arrogance to triumph. I had proven to myself that I was resilient, intelligent, and capable of defending my own self-worth. I learned that the deepest form of power is calm, intelligent action. Rage burns out quickly, but methodical, legal justice is permanent. David had mistaken my compassion for weakness, and my patience for ignorance. My revenge taught me that when someone shows you who they truly are, not just once, but with a deliberate, documented second betrayal, you must believe them, and you must act decisively to protect your truth. Moral impact. The foundation of any life, or any relationship, must be absolute honesty. David's crime was not just his infidelity. It was his fundamental belief that his talent and charisma could excuse his systematic lies. Trust is not a renewable resource. When it is broken twice, especially with the calculated intention to destroy you, the only choice is to seek justice that brings accountability. I didn't just survive the betrayal. I used his own blueprint, his secret diary, to dismantle his empire and rebuild mine stronger, based on a foundation of absolute truth. My focus now is on my children. I am teaching them, not through bitterness, but through example, that integrity is the only armor you truly need. I teach them that you never have to compromise your honesty to survive. I walked away from the wreckage of his perfect lie with my conscience clean, my children safe, and my future entirely my own. The architect who thought he could control every detail of his life was undone by the smallest, quietest detail of all, the words he wrote in his secret diary. And that, truly, is the profound and necessary end to the perfect secret he tried to hide. I am free. Legal justice is swift, but emotional healing is a marathon. In the months following the divorce and David's sentencing, the dramatic energy of the conflict gave way to a quiet, overwhelming exhaustion. I had been living in a state of high alert for over a year, maintaining the perfect disguise, planning every move. Now, with the external threat gone, the internal damage began to surface. I found myself questioning everything. Was every compliment a lie? Was every moment of shared laughter a calculated performance? The trauma of the betrayal wasn't just in the act, but in the deep, sickening realization that the man I loved never actually existed. He was a character written by David, the architect of lies. I began to see a therapist, a necessity I approached with the same methodical focus I applied to my revenge plan. I realized I was suffering not just from the loss of a husband, but from the loss of my own judgment. I had to rebuild my confidence in my ability to assess character, to trust my own instincts, and most importantly, to trust my worth. The diary, once my weapon, became a symbol. I kept it locked away, not out of secrecy, but as a reminder. It wasn't a reminder of David's cruelty. It was a reminder of my resilience. It was proof that when pushed to the absolute brink, I did not collapse into victimhood. I stood up, I investigated, and I sought justice. That knowledge became the new foundation of my identity. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the residual paranoia. Every late text message, every closed door, every whispered conversation felt like a fresh betrayal. I had to consciously teach myself that not every person was a lie waiting to be discovered. I had to separate David's pathological dishonesty from the honest, good people who still existed in the world. My friendships became my anchor. My closest friends, who had supported me through the public scrutiny without judgment, were essential. They saw past the scandal and focused on me. They reminded me of the woman I was before David's lies consumed our world. The intelligent, kind, and funny person who had been temporarily eclipsed by the role of the wife. I started taking classes, something purely for myself, unconnected to teaching or motherhood. I took up pottery. The slow, messy, demanding work of molding clay with my hands was therapeutic. It was the opposite of David's cold, hard architecture. It was about creating something beautiful and imperfect from soft, malleable truth. It symbolized my own rebuilding, taking the broken, soft pieces of my life and creating something new, something entirely mine. The path to recovery wasn't a straight line. There were days when the anger would bubble up, the sheer injustice and of his betrayal, and the years he stole. But even the anger had transformed. It was no longer directed at him. It was directed at the lie itself. And I knew the lie had been dealt with, surgically and permanently. The secret diary, his perfect secret, was the key that unlocked my freedom. The biggest lesson I learned from this entire catastrophic episode was about the nature of power. For years, I believed power lay in stability, in financial security, and in the outward appearance of a perfect marriage. David certainly believed this. His power was derived from his title, his money, and his ability to construct an impeccable facade. But I discovered that true power is internal. It is the ability to look at an undeniable lie and say, "No, this stops now." My power wasn't in wealth. It was in the methodical collection of truth. It was in the hours I spent meticulously documenting his movements, cross-referencing his accounts, and ultimately using his own words, his diary, to ensure his accountability. My power was patience, intelligence, and unwavering integrity. I changed the way I viewed relationships. I became fiercely guarded about my time and my energy. I no longer tolerated ambiguity. When a friend was vague or a potential new date seemed too smooth, I trusted the uncomfortable flicker of my instinct. That instinct, once dulled by years of willful ignorance in my marriage, was now sharpened into a precise tool. I realized that my initial reaction to the first betrayal years ago, the decision to forgive and rebuild, was born out of love. Yes, but also a deep-seated fear of being alone and a fear of confronting massive conflict. The second betrayal stripped that fear away. When you lose everything, you realize you have nothing left to protect but your own self-respect. I rarely thought about David, but when I did, I thought about his prison. Not the literal prison he was in, but the prison of his own character. He had built such a massive wall of lies that he could no longer find his way back to the truth. The irony was devastating. The architect who designed structures for a living had failed to design a stable life for himself because he refused to use honest materials. His ultimate loss wasn't the millions he stole or the career he sacrificed. His ultimate loss was the trust of his children. That pain, the realization that his grand, selfish deception had cost him the pure, innocent love of his own children, was a consequence far more profound than any fine or sentence. I made sure they knew they were loved, and that his mistakes were his alone. My journey through this betrayal taught me the invaluable, unspoken lessons of resilience. It taught me that while you cannot control what others do, you have absolute control over how you respond. I chose to respond not as a bitter ex-wife seeking vengeance, but as a citizen seeking justice. I chose to respond not by breaking the law, but by exposing the truth. That choice was the most empowering decision I ever made. I had not just closed a terrible chapter. I had written a strong, honest opening to my new life. A year and a half after the diary exposed his double life, I stood in my new home, looking out at the city. This house had no ghosts, no secrets, and no polished lies. It was mine, paid for with the honest work I had always done, and secured by the legal measures I had meticulously enforced. I had reclaimed the narrative of my own life. When people asked about the divorce, I was brief and unwavering. It was a necessary ending to a relationship built on dishonesty. I refused to let the scandal define me. I defined myself by my action, not my reaction. I returned to teaching full-time, finding immense satisfaction in the simplicity and honesty of guiding young minds. I taught my students about history, but I taught my children about integrity. I taught them that moral courage is the rarest form of strength. I started dating again, slowly, cautiously. The criteria were simple and non-negotiable: transparency, respect, and a deep-seated honesty. I wasn't looking for a replacement for David. I was looking for a partner who valued the same unbreakable foundation of trust that I now held sacred. I learned to enjoy the slow dance of getting to know someone again, without the fear of a hidden diary lurking in a dark corner. The diary itself remained in my possession, but its significance changed. It was no longer a weapon or a symbol of pain. It was a testament to the past, a document of what I overcame. One sunny afternoon, after a long conversation with my therapist and my attorney, I decided to do the final symbolic act of letting go. I brought the diary and the post office receipt to a secure, professional shredding service. I didn't burn it or bury it. That felt too dramatic, too focused on the past. I wanted the end to be clean and administrative, just like the end of his career. I watched the thick leather-bound book, the record of all his secrets, lies, and malice, turn into silent, useless confetti. The act was profoundly liberating. The physical evidence was gone, but the lesson was cemented in my soul. I walked out of that building feeling lighter than I had felt in years. The betrayal was no longer a weight. It was a scar, a mark of a serious wound that had fully healed, leaving me stronger and wiser. I was no longer defined by David's choices. I was defined by my own. My life was no longer perfect, but it was authentic. It was built on the hard-won knowledge that resilience is simply the courage to start over, armed with the truth. I had achieved far more than revenge. I had achieved self-respect. Looking back, the entire catastrophe felt like a terrible, necessary trial. David, the architect, designed beautiful things with stone and steel, but he failed to design a life built on solid moral ground. He broke our trust, and in doing so, he gifted me the necessary courage to break his perfect, terrible secret. I learned that true strength is not found in avoiding conflict, but in meeting it with unwavering truth. I was faced with a choice: descend into bitterness and chaos, or rise into quiet, surgical justice. I chose the latter, and that choice saved my life. I now teach my children that money is fleeting. Status is temporary, but your integrity is the one thing no one can ever take from you, unless you give it away. David gave his away, piece by piece, writing his own tragic fate in that leather-bound journal. I simply collected the evidence. My perfect life was a myth. My real life, the messy, complicated, honest life I live now, is a masterpiece of my own making. It is grounded in reality, secured by truth, and protected by the knowledge that I possess the strength to stand alone, to fight for what is right, and to ensure that calculated cruelty meets definitive accountability. If you are listening to this, and you are facing a moment of deep betrayal, remember my story. Do not waste your energy on emotional theatrics. Do not settle for momentary satisfaction. Go deep, find the one truth. Let the system of justice, backed by your meticulous evidence, deliver the consequence. Be the quiet, patient architect of your own clean break. He thought he had designed the perfect escape plan, but he only designed the final chapter of his own destruction. My life is safe. My children are secure. My future is open and honest. The diary is gone, but the powerful, indelible lesson remains. I am the architect of my own future now, and that is a victory that is absolutely permanent. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Your resilience is your power. Remember that always.